Hi, welcome to the Peaceful Home. If you're new here, I'm Teresa Elling, and I'm so excited to be a part of Flippin Friday. I've done several of these with Jamie over at Board or Bananas and Board or Bananas DIY. I'll leave the links to her channel below as well as the playlist. There will be tons of collaborators posting their videos with their own flips, DIYs, and fixer-upper projects. Yesterday, I finally decided to do something with this piece of wood that I found at a yard sale. Now, this yard sale was out in the country and it was on a big property, and there was all kinds of like farm equipment and tools, and there were old boards up against a fence. And when I was looking at the wood, I noticed down in the ground the top of this piece of wood, and it was buried. You could only see the surface of it. And I kind of dug it up a little bit, and I asked the owner, how much for this? And he laughed and he goes, you can have that. So I brought it home, and I knew that I was going to want to do something with it. I'm in the process of redoing my guest room, and I have this small wall in between the bathroom door and the closet. And I knew that I wanted to put a little peg rack up above and a bench down below. So I thought this piece of wood would be the perfect seat for a bench. First off, I did a little sketch of what I was thinking in my head, and I know I could have done something a little more advanced. I could have done angled legs. I could have used my Craig jig to do pocket holes so that you wouldn't see any screws, but I decided I was going to do this really simple and rustic. I measured the length according to what would fit on that wall, and I measured the height according to this bench that I made a few years ago. I wanted something about the same height. I would have just used this bench, but it was way too wide for the space. This board had been sitting in wet soil and grass for so long that it had rotted out on the edges. It actually had moss growing on it. So I used my hammer to hit the edges and just see where the rot was, because although I want it to be rustic, I also want it to be sturdy. I don't want anyone falling through it when they sit down on it. Most of the damage was on the corners, and I knew I needed to shorten the piece anyway, so it was easy to cut off the ends and have the best part in the middle. I wanted to distress those freshly cut ends, so I just hit the edges up a bit with a hammer. And then I sanded the whole piece down, not really to make it smooth as much as to unify the piece, get off another layer of dirt, and I actually dug the corner of my sander in some spots to distress it even further. There was one area where there was some old finish on the board, and I just used a putty knife to scrape most of that off. I had some old 2x4s from a carport that we removed and some old barn wood, and so I headed up to the barn to pick out some pieces. I just went up to the barn to gather some 2x4s for this project, and it is 108 degrees here. So I'm just dripping. I think I'm going to have to get in the pool and work while I'm wet if I'm going to survive. My legs needed to be 15 inches long, so I measured and cut those with the chop saw. I also cut the two connecting pieces. I sanded those so they would be somewhat smooth, no jagged edges, and cut down the corners just a little bit. Where the leg was going to meet the connector, I wanted to make sure to do 2 holes so that the connector couldn't twist. I wanted to pre-drill those so that I didn't have any wood splitting. I was drilling into another piece of 2x4 that I used as my base, and I don't ever want to mix up my project pieces with my drill board, so I marked it with an X just so I wouldn't confuse the pieces. I attached these with 2.5-inch deck screws. And then I took the 2 pieces, which are just like little 1-rung ladders, and I set them on the seat upside down so I could figure out where I wanted to place them. And then I measured for the post that I was going to use for the bottom support piece. I had this old peeler core that I cut down to size and gave it a quick sanding to smooth it out. and to knock down the color a little bit because it had a much darker color than the rest of the bench. Then I put the post between the two sets of legs and put a 3-inch screw into each side, going right into the center of the post. The last thing to do was to flip the whole thing over, make sure my legs stayed where they needed to be, and then I drilled 4 very small holes into the seat. I decided I didn't really want to see screw heads on the seat, so I used finishing nails. And I had to hammer pretty hard to get those in, so I know that it will be secure. An advantage of using screws over nails is that screws attach themselves into the wood and it becomes a very secure connection. Nails over time will eventually work their way out. So sometimes I've noticed with an old crate or piece of furniture that a nail has started to rise up and you have to hammer them back down. Eventually they won't hold anymore and you've got to get either a thicker nail or a screw to really make that connection hold. Even though I made this for my guest room, I'll show you a couple of other ways that you could style a bench like this. This is in the middle of my series of how to decorate a room from start to finish, and I'm using my guest room as an example. I'll leave the playlist below for that series so that you can see everything from how to be inspired to redecorate a room, the steps to take to choose paint colors, curtains, etc. I would love it if you would subscribe, and then you won't miss a single video in this series. Here's what the bench looks like, all finished. I'm really happy with it. It has just the rustic look that I wanted. And because I customized it, it fits perfectly where I need it. It's a great spot for guests to put on or take off shoes. And I think it's a great addition to my guest room. You could also put a bench like this at the end of a bed. It would look really cute. I think it's nice to have a bench at the end of the bed to place extra pillows when you're going to sleep. Another idea is to put it on a front porch, either kind of as a plant bench with plants or as a little coffee table. A small bench like this can be used just about anywhere in your home. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this flip of this mossy, dilapidated old board as I turned it into something beautiful and functional. Jamie, thank you so much for this collaboration. I encourage you all to check the playlist below and see the other videos for Flippin Friday. Thank you so much for joining me today on The Peaceful Home.